Alright, so this is lesson 1.4. This is part 2 of the video. And we defined the trig functions. We did one problem, which is still up here. I'm going to erase this now, which is still up there. We did one problem to practice the definition of the trig functions. And now I've got to show you a couple more of these. And if you've already got this down, you can go through these a little quicker, but we'll practice it again. Okay, we know they're going to give us this point where it ends up. We might sketch it out and say, what are they talking about? Way over here now, -4, 3. So talking about some angle that started on the positive x-axis, some angle theta, and it opened up in a counterclockwise direction, and they ended up here. And the question is, what's the sine, cosine, tangent, secant, cosecant, cotangent of this angle theta? And so we're going to use our definitions, and always part 1 will be, and again, if you want to sketch a triangle, you can. And always drop that triangle down to the x-axis. You would never bring it over to the y-axis. That'll actually mess you up a little bit. And we know this is a -4 as a distance. It's a +4. And going up and down, we've got a 3. You may recognize that already. That's a 3, 4. So we know the hypotenuse is 5. If not, doesn't hurt to work it out. R squared is x squared plus y squared. And so we've got a 16 here, a 9 here, we've got a 25. So we'll take the square root of that. Again, we mentioned previously, r is always positive. Clearly not true for x and y, or certainly not for x, and it won't be true for y. R is always positive, so r equals 5. And once you're to there, we're pretty well done with the problem. It's just punching these into the definition now. So what's the sine of this angle? Well, look back in your sheet. Sine is y over r. So the sine is 3/5. Quick and easy. Let's get the cosecant. That's the reciprocal. 5/3. Let's get the cosine. Cosine is x over r. So -4/5. And we start to see certain things about these trig functions. So cosines can be negative. Could a sine be negative? Try it and see. Or, try different possibilities. Secant, kind of missed that there. Secant is reciprocal. Reciprocal is still negative. The number is negative, the reciprocal is still negative, but it becomes 5/4. We flip, the sign does not change when you take a reciprocal. And then the tangent, again, you realize, wait, we could have answered that first. We didn't have to figure out r for that. Tangent is y over x, so we've got a 3 over -4. And the way it works with a negative in a fraction is make the front of it negative. There's one negative, so your fraction is negative. If you ever had two negatives, then that fraction becomes positive. There's one negative, so we just kind of stick a negative in front. And the cotangent of theta is the reciprocal, still negative, and we get -4/3. All right, and those are our trig functions for that condition. Not bad. Let's try it again. And this is a slightly interesting one. Not that the other one wasn't, but we're at the point 3, 0. Which is right there. So 3, 0 is there. So we started in the positive x-axis. We didn't really open up at all. So that angle is 0. So what's the sine of 0 and the cosine of 0 and the tangent of 0? That's essentially what we're figuring out. So that part's kind of interesting. The next part is, what's r? And what is r when you don't even have a triangle? How can you think Pythagorean theorem? Well, we said these are a little more general now, and we know r squared is x squared plus y squared. Or the way we said it was r is the square root of x squared plus y squared. But if you square both sides, you get this equation. So let's see. R squared equals 3 squared plus 0 squared. R squared equals 9 plus 0, which is 9. So r equals the square root of 9, which is 3. And again, look at the picture. Oh, that makes sense. It's that distance right there. Of course that's 3. So r is 3. And look at that. Once you've got that, we are done. Sine of theta, y over r, 0 over 3. And show me you know what that means. 0 over 3 is 0. Now let's take the reciprocal, the cosecant. Take the reciprocal, I get 3 over 0. And again, I know seniors know this better, but freshman algebra drive me crazy. People leave answers like that, 3 over 0. Show me you know what that means. That means undefined. You can't break things into 0 pieces. That makes no sense. So 3 over 0 is undefined. 0 over 3 is 0. All right. Try our luck with cosine. Cosine is x over r. So we've got 3 over 3. Definitely reduce that fraction. Gives me a 1. And then the secant is the reciprocal. And the reciprocal of 1 is 1. And then we come to the tangent, which is y over x. So we get a 0 over a 3. And again, show me you know what that is. That's a 0. And then the cotangent is x over y. I've got a 3 over 0, which again gives me undefined. All right. Let's try this next one without a picture. Let's just do it analytically. We've got our x. We've got our y. Let's get the r here. And again, one of the nice things I really enjoy this about trig is all of the algebra it makes you bring back and review. And this is a good example of some of that where it's just some algebra things you need to remember. Okay, what's r squared? It's x squared plus y squared. We know when you square a negative, it becomes positive. So we've got a 1. And a square root squared cancels out, gives me 3. 1 and 3 is 4. I take the square root, and I've got r equals 2. And luckily, you've got this as a recording, so I'm going to take this out of the picture. So we have a little room here, and let's get these. All right, what's the sign? Sine of theta is y over r, so it's negative square root of 3 all over 2. Let's get the cosecant. That's the reciprocal, still negative, but it's 2 over the square root of 3. And again, you look at that, and you would remember your algebra. You can't leave square roots on the bottom of a fraction. So we take the top and bottom by square root of 3. And the top I get negative 2 square root of 3. And the bottom I get just a 3. Square root of 3 times square root of 3 is just 3. Really good practice. And I end up with that answer, negative 2 root 3 over 3 for the cosecant. All right, let's get the cosine. Cosine is x over r, so it's negative 1 over 2, which is the best I can do with that. Secant is a reciprocal, negative 2 over 1, which reduces to just negative 2. And then the tangent doesn't look too bad. It's a negative divided by a negative, which I know is positive. I know when I divide by 1, I'm back where I started. So I get square root of 3. And then the cotangent is the reciprocal. And take your pick. Take this reciprocal, or take, whichever one is easier for you. So I'm going to take the second one. The reciprocal of square root of 3 is 1 over square root of 3. Can't leave square roots on the bottom. Rationalize it. And I come up with square root of 3. It's a little sloppy. Let's try that again. I come up with square root of 3 all over 3 for cotangent. So really good practice just with the definitions of the trig functions. There'll be more of these in your homework for you to practice as well. Okay, a couple more things to practice here. Here's another one, just again, getting to know these definitions. So they're going to give you a point xy. They're going to tell you which quadrant it's in. So look, it's in the second quadrant, or it's in the third quadrant, or it's in the third quadrant again. And you got to figure out, is this thing going to be positive or negative? Is this ratio positive or negative? If you forgot your quadrants, they also go counterclockwise. This is the first quadrant. This is the second quadrant. This is the third quadrant. It won't come up on these problems, but that's the fourth quadrant over there. So let's think this through. We've got this problem. We are over here. Maybe x isn't the best here, but we are over here somewhere in the second quadrant. The question is, in the second quadrant, what is your x going to be? Is it positive or negative? And what's your r going to be? And we've said that already. R is always positive. So we know in the bottom we've got a positive. And in the second quadrant, how do you get over here? Well, the x-coordinate, I had to go to the left. The x-coordinate is negative. So I've got a negative number, and I kind of like to abbreviate it like this, a negative divided by a positive. And you know from algebra, negative divided by a positive gives you a negative. So in the second quadrant, this ratio, which is x over r, which you might think, or you might remember, wait, that's the cosine. In the second quadrant, it's going to turn out the cosine is negative. So again, we're just getting to know these things. Okay, how about this one? Third quadrant, we're over here. Y over r, what happens over here? I'm just going to go with my, well, we know r is always positive. In the third quadrant, y is negative. A negative by a positive is a negative. Oops. Should make that a box just to be consistent. And hopefully you're not thinking, wait, all the answers are negative. This last one will be positive, I bet. Let's look and see. We're back in the third quadrant. Get a different color here. Third quadrant. What's your x coordinate? Negative. What's your y coordinate? Negative. So what's going on here? You've got a negative number divided by a negative number, and a negative by a negative gives you a positive. Finally, we get something that's positive. And kind of going back here to these, what are we really talking about? Y over r was the sign. So what we're saying in the second quadrant, in the third quadrant, the sign is always going to be negative. Well, what's this over here? The y over x, that's the tangent. And the tangent in the third quadrant will always be positive.